Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair, you are found guilty of theft and fraud. I sentence you to 5 years in the territorial prison. The gavel fell. Beth's world shattered. 5 years stolen by lies. Then the doors burst open. This trial is suspended. I have a warrant for the arrest of Victor Hargrove on charges of arson, fraud, and conspiracy to murder. But this story didn't start in a courtroom. It started on a dusty street in Granger, Wyoming, where a crippled widow with $3 to her name stood between survival and surrender. The dust rose in thin columns from Main Street as the afternoon sun hammered down on Granger, Wyoming. It was the kind of heat that made men seek shade and horses stamp their feet with irritation. The stagecoach had departed an hour ago, leaving behind only wheel ruts in the dirt and the fading echo of its departure. Elizabeth Sinclair stood in the center of that dusty street, one hand gripping a wooden walking stick, the other clutching a worn leather bag that contained everything she owned in this world. Her left leg dragged slightly as she moved, leaving a faint trail in the dust behind her. The limp was unmistakable, permanent, a souvenir from a night 6 months ago that had cost her everything. People stared. Not the quick glances of curiosity, but the long, deliberate stares of judgment. A woman in a faded blue dress whispered something to her companion. They both looked at Beth, then away, their faces set in expressions of disapproval. A man loading supplies onto a wagon paused mid-motion, his eyes traveling from her face to her leg and back again. His lip curled slightly before he returned to his work. Beth kept her chin up, her back straight. She had learned in the past 6 months that dignity was sometimes the only thing they could not take from you. Everything else could be stripped away: reputation, security, hope. But dignity that had to be surrendered. And Beth Sinclair had not come this far to surrender now. The hotel stood at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that promised rest and anonymity. She walked toward it, each step a small negotiation between her body and her will. The walking stick tapped against the wooden planks of the boardwalk as she climbed the 3 steps to the entrance. The door was heavy. She pushed it open with effort that made her jaw tighten. The lobby was dim after the bright street, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. The clerk behind the desk was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the expression of someone who had seen too much of human nature and found it disappointing. He looked up as she approached, his gaze dropping immediately to her leg. Beth had seen that look before. That particular combination of pity and revulsion. She set her bag on the floor and leaned her weight against the walking stick. "I need a room, please." The clerk's eyes remained fixed on her leg for another moment before rising to her face. "We're full." Beth glanced at the board behind him, where room keys hung from numbered hooks. At least half the keys were present. "The sign outside says vacancy." "The sign's old. Haven't gotten around to changing it." His tone was flat, final. "I see." Beth picked up her bag. "Thank you for your time." She did not argue, did not plead. She simply turned and walked back toward that bright rectangle of doorway, her stick tapping its steady rhythm against the floor. Behind her she heard the clerk clear his throat, a sound of satisfaction. He had done his civic duty, kept the undesirable element out of his establishment. The street was even hotter when she emerged. Or perhaps it was just that the rejection had used up what little reserve she had left. Beth found a bench in the shade of an awning and sat down carefully, positioning her leg to minimize the ache that had become her constant companion. She opened her bag and counted the coins in her purse for the 3rd time that day, as if the number might have changed. $3.47. The mail-order bride arrangement had fallen through 2 days ago. The man who had sent for her, Samuel Garrett, had taken one look at her leg and declared the deal void. Beth closed her eyes against the memory. His face, the way it had shifted from anticipation to disappointment to something colder. "I asked for a wife, not a cripple. Deal's off." He had walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing at the train station with her bag and her walking stick and nowhere to go. $3.47 would not buy passage back east, would not buy much of anything except maybe a few more days of survival. And then Beth opened her eyes and looked at the street, at the people who moved through their lives with purpose and destination. She had neither anymore. A woman's voice cut through the afternoon quiet, sharp and carrying. Heard she killed her husband back east. For the money. Beth's head turned. Two women stood outside the mercantile pretending to examine bolts of fabric in the window, but their attention was clearly elsewhere. On her. "That's what I heard too," the second woman replied louder than necessary. "Caused the carriage accident. Walked away with a fortune." The first woman shook her head with theatrical sympathy. "Shameful. And now she comes here thinking we won't know what she is." Beth looked away. Let them talk. Let them believe whatever narrative made them feel superior. The truth was more complicated and far less interesting. Thomas Sinclair had been drunk the night of the accident. Again. He had insisted on driving despite Beth's protests. The carriage had overturned on a curve he took too fast. Thomas died instantly. Beth survived, but her leg did not. There had been no fortune, only debts. Thomas's family had blamed her, whispered that she had wanted him dead, that she had somehow caused the accident. They had taken everything, leaving her with nothing but scandal and the clothes on her back. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like salvation, a chance to start over where nobody knew her story. But stories had a way of traveling, especially the ugly ones. The afternoon stretched on. Beth remained on her bench watching the town go about its business. She was very good at being invisible now, at taking up as little space as possible, at not drawing attention, but invisibility did not solve the practical problem of where to sleep tonight, or eat, or what to do when the $3.47 ran out. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains when she finally rose. Her leg had stiffened from sitting, and the first few steps were particularly difficult. She forced herself to move, to walk, to appear purposeful, even though she had no purpose beyond existing through another day. The church stood at the north end of town, its white steeple rising against the darkening sky. Beth had not been to church since Thomas's funeral, where his family had sat in the front pew and she had been relegated to the back, a leper in mourning clothes. But churches meant sanctuary. Sometimes they meant charity. And Beth had reached the point where pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Sunday came with clouds that promised rain, but delivered only humidity. Beth wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she had washed in a creek outside town and dried on bushes. Her hair was pinned neatly under a modest bonnet. She looked respectable, or as respectable as a crippled widow with a scandal attached to her name could look. The church was already filling when she arrived. Families in their Sunday clothes, children scrubbed and squirming men in suits that saw light only once a week. Beth slipped into the back pew, the one nearest the door, the one where transients and undesirables traditionally sat. The whispers started almost immediately. Heads turned, eyes assessed. A woman 2 pews ahead leaned toward her companion and said something behind her hand. The companion glanced back at Beth, her expression a mix of curiosity and condemnation. Reverend Collins was a man in his 50s with the kind of face that suggested he had seen both the best and worst of human nature and had learned to maintain a diplomatic neutrality toward both. He greeted Beth after the opening hymn with a stiff nod. "Welcome to Granger, Mrs. Sinclair." So he knew her name, which meant he knew her story. Beth nodded back, said nothing. Sometimes silence was the safest response. The sermon was about forgiveness, about casting the first stone. Beth listened and tried not to see the irony. When it ended, she remained seated while the congregation filed out their conversations, filling the small church with the noise of community. She was not part of that community, would never be part of it. But perhaps someone might point her toward work, toward any opportunity that might keep her alive a little longer. Outside, the women gathered in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. They wore their social smiles, the ones that showed teeth but not warmth. Beth approached slowly, her walking stick announcing her presence with each tap against the ground. The women's conversation died as she neared. Silence spread like ripples in water. Beth stopped at a respectful distance. Mrs. Hargrove, ladies, I wonder if I might ask for some guidance. Regina Hargrove was a woman in her 40s, handsome in a severe way, dressed in deep purple silk that must have cost more than Beth's entire wardrobe. She was the wife of Victor Hargrove, the town's banker and most influential citizen. Her word carried weight. Her approval meant acceptance. Her disapproval meant exile. Regina looked at Beth the way one might look at something unpleasant discovered on the bottom of a shoe. "Mrs. Sinclair, yes, I heard about your circumstances. Very tragic." The way she said tragic suggested she found it anything but. Her gaze dropped pointedly to Beth's leg, then rose again with calculated slowness. "But you must understand we have standards in this community. We cannot have just anyone among respectable families." The other women murmured agreement. Beth felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the heat of humiliation rising up her neck. But her voice remained steady when she spoke. "I am not asking for charity, ma'am, just a chance to work. I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I can cook and clean and teach children their letters. I only need an opportunity to prove myself useful. A woman who cannot even walk properly." Regina's voice rose slightly loud enough to be heard by others nearby. "What work could you possibly do? You would be a burden to any household that took you in." Scattered laughs from the gathered women. Not loud, not cruel exactly, but enough to make the point. Beth was ridiculous, presumptuous, an object of pity at best, contempt at worst. Beth felt something harden inside her. She had been judged, found wanting, and dismissed more times than she could count in the past 6 months. But something about this moment, this woman's casual cruelty delivered in the shadow of a church that had just preached forgiveness, broke through the careful control she had maintained. "I can do any work that does not require running away from the truth, Mrs. Hargrove." The silence that followed was absolute. Regina's face flushed deep red. The other women gasped, their hands rising to their throats in practiced shock. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "I dare because I have nothing left to lose." Beth's voice was quiet but clear. "You have already decided what I am, what I deserve. Nothing I say or do will change that. So at least let me leave with the truth spoken." She turned and walked away, her stick tapping its steady rhythm, her head high despite the trembling in her legs. Behind her, the women erupted in scandalized conversation. Beth did not look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. At the edge of the churchyard, she paused. A man stood beneath another tree apart from the main crowd. He was tall, perhaps in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt, and canvas pants, a black hat pulled low against the sun. But it was his face that caught Beth's attention. The absolute stillness of it, the way his jaw was set tight, the way his hands hanging loose at his sides had curled into fists. He had been watching, had seen the entire exchange, and something in his expression suggested he had not approved. Their eyes met for a brief moment. His were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds. Then he looked away, and Beth continued walking, adding him to the long list of witnesses to her humiliation. She walked until the church was out of sight, until the sound of voices faded into the afternoon quiet. Then she found a place to sit, a fallen log beside the road, and allowed herself the luxury of tears. Not many. Just enough to ease the pressure building behind her eyes. Then she wiped her face with her sleeve, straightened her shoulders, and began the long walk back toward town. She had no plan, no prospects. $3.47. And the growing certainty that Granger, Wyoming was just another place that had no room for someone like her. The sun was setting when she reached the edge of town. The sky had turned orange and purple, beautiful in the way that desert sunsets are indifferent to human suffering. Beth stood looking at Main Street, at the buildings that held no welcome at the people she could see moving behind, lit windows living their lives in their homes with their families. She sat down on a bench outside the general store, the same one she had occupied yesterday. Perhaps she would sit here until someone told her to move, and then she would sit somewhere else. And eventually, when she had nowhere left to sit, when the $3.47 were gone, when her body finally gave out from exhaustion and hunger and despair, she would simply stop. And the world would continue, indifferent, beautiful, unconcerned. Hoofbeats on the road. Beth looked up. A man on horseback riding into town from the west. The same man from the church, she realized as he drew closer. He rode well comfortable in the saddle, his body moving with the horse's gait in the unconscious way of someone born to it. He reined in his horse in front of the general store, dismounted with fluid economy, tied the reins to the hitching post. Then he turned and looked directly at Beth. She straightened, suddenly conscious of how she must appear. Dusty, exhausted, defeated. The man walked toward her, his boots striking the wooden boardwalk with solid thuds. He stopped a respectful distance away, removed his hat. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, curling at his collar. "Mrs. Sinclair." His voice was deep, rough-edged, with an accent that spoke of Missouri or Kansas. Beth's hand tightened on her walking stick. "Yes. Name's Caleb Hart. I'm foreman at Diamond Creek Ranch." Beth waited. Experience had taught her that preambles usually led to rejection. "I want to offer you a job." The words hung in the air between them. Beth stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon. A job. Mr. Whitmore, the ranch owner, needs a housekeeper and a tutor for his daughter. You said you can read and write?" "Yes, but I do not understand. Why would you offer me work? You do not know me." Caleb's gray eyes studied her face. "I know enough. I know you were treated poorly at the church today. I know you handled it with more grace than most would have managed. And I know we need help and you need work. Seems straightforward to me." Beth's mind raced. This had to be some kind of trap, some cruel joke. Men did not simply offer jobs to strange women with bad reputations and physical disabilities. There was always a price, always an expectation. What exactly would be expected of me? Housekeeping, cooking, teaching the girl her letters and numbers, helping with accounts if you have the skill for it, room and board included, $15 a month. And what else? Caleb's brow furrowed. What else what? What else would be expected? Beth met his gaze directly. "I have learned that offers of help usually come with conditions, unspoken expectations. I would prefer to know what they are before I accept." Understanding crossed his face, followed by something that might have been anger. But the anger was not directed at her. "Mrs. Sinclair, let me be clear. You would have your own room in the main house, with a lock on the door. Mr. Whitmore is a decent man, a widower raising his daughter alone. He will not bother you. I will not bother you. Any ranch hand who tries will answer to me. You are being offered employment. Nothing more, nothing less." "Why?" The word came out sharper than Beth intended. "Why would you do this? No one else in this town will even speak to me." Caleb was silent for a long moment. His jaw worked as if he were deciding how much to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter. "I lost my wife and son 3 years ago. Diphtheria. I was away on a trail drive when it happened. Came back to graves and an empty house." Beth's breath caught. "I am sorry. The point is, I know what it looks like when someone has lost everything, when they are just trying to survive one more day. I saw it in you today, and I decided that if I could help, I should." He paused. "My wife would have wanted me to help." Beth looked at this man, this stranger, who was offering her something she had almost given up hoping for, a chance, not charity, but honest work, a reason to keep going. "People will talk," she said quietly. "They will say terrible things about me, about you for hiring me. People always talk. Question is, do you want the job or not?" Beth thought about the $3.47, about the bench she had been planning to sleep on tonight, about the slow certainty of failure and surrender. Then she thought about the possibility that this man meant what he said, that perhaps in this harsh land there was still room for second chances. What are the terms? Room board $15 a month. Like I said, you keep house, teach the girl, help with accounts if needed. You prove you can do the work, you stay. You cannot, you leave. Fair. Fair. Beth stood wincing slightly as her leg protested. She extended her hand. I accept your offer, Mr. Hart. His grip was firm, calloused, brief. The wagon leaves in an hour. Livery stable at the end of town. Can you be ready? I am ready now. Good. I will see you there. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Mrs. Sinclair, one more thing. On my ranch, people are judged by their work, not their past. You give me honest effort, I will give you honest treatment. Understood? Understood. He nodded once and walked away, untying his horse and swinging up into the saddle with the easy grace of long practice. Beth watched him ride toward the far end of town, her mind still struggling to process what had just happened. A job. A place to stay. $15 a month. It was more than she had dared hope for. But underneath the relief was a current of fear. What if she could not do the work? What if her leg made her too slow, too clumsy? What if this Mr. Whitmore took one look at her and changed his mind? Beth pushed the thoughts away. She had learned that fear was a luxury like pride. You could indulge it when you had resources to waste. When you were living on the edge of survival, you did what needed to be done and worried about consequences later. She picked up her bag and began walking toward the livery stable. Her leg ached with each step, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on reaching the wagon before the hour was up, on not allowing herself to hope too much, because hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. The livery stable smelled of hay and horses and leather, warm and familiar scents that reminded Beth of a life before everything fell apart. Caleb was loading supplies into a wagon, moving with the efficient economy of someone who had performed the same task 1,000 times. He glanced up as Beth approached, nodded acknowledgement, then returned to his work. Beth set her bag down and waited. She was early. The hour was not quite up. But she had learned that eager was better than late, that showing up before you were required suggested dependability. And dependability was perhaps the only currency she had left to trade. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her turn. A man was approaching, well-dressed in a dark suit, despite the heat his shoes polished to a shine that seemed impractical for a frontier town. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of face that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. His eyes fixed on Caleb with the intensity of someone about to deliver an unpleasant message. Hart, what is this I hear about you hiring that woman? Caleb did not look up from securing a rope. Mr. Whitmore needs a housekeeper. She is a scandal, a cripple, and possibly a murderer. Beth felt the words like physical blows, but she kept her face neutral. She had heard worse. The man had not even acknowledged her presence, speaking about her as if she were an object under discussion rather than a person standing 10 feet away. Caleb straightened slowly and turned to face the man. His expression had not changed, but something in his posture suggested contained violence. She is an employee. Unless you have proof of murder, I suggest you keep your speculation to yourself. I am Victor Hargrove. The man's tone suggested this should mean something. President of Granger Bank. I serve on the town council. My wife told me about the incident at church. This woman insulted her. Your wife insulted her first. That is irrelevant. The point is, Hart, you are making a mistake. This will reflect poorly on Mr. Whitmore's reputation, on the ranch, on everyone associated with Diamond Creek. Caleb took a step closer to Hargrove, not threatening exactly, but reducing the space between them in a way that made Hargrove shift his weight backward slightly. Mr. Hargrove, with all due respect, which is very little, you do not dictate who Mr. Whitmore employs. If you have concerns, take them up with him. Otherwise, step aside. A small crowd had gathered, Beth noticed. Nothing drew attention in a small town like Conflict. People pretended to go about their business while obviously watching, listening, ready to carry the story to others who were not present. Hargrove's face flushed red, but he held his ground. You are making an enemy, Hart. Would not be my first. Caleb's voice was flat, empty of emotion, which somehow made it more intimidating than anger would have been. Hargrove's gaze shifted to Beth for the first time. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, assessing, calculating. Mrs. Sinclair, I hope you know what you are getting into. Life on an isolated ranch can be difficult for a woman alone." Beth met his stare without flinching. "I am getting a job, Mr. Hargrove. Honest work. I believe that is something your bank values." It was a small thrust, barely a barb, but it landed. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mrs. Sinclair. Small towns have long memories. Mistakes made here tend to follow people." "Then it is fortunate I am not planning to make any mistakes." Hargrove looked between Beth and Caleb, clearly recognizing that he had lost this particular battle. "Very well, but do not say I did not warn you both." He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking against the ground with sharp, angry sounds. The crowd dispersed slowly, disappointed that the confrontation had not escalated further. Caleb returned to loading the wagon as if nothing had happened. Beth stood in the same spot, her heart racing, her hands trembling slightly on the walking stick. "That man," she said quietly, "he is trouble." "Yeah." Caleb tied off the last rope and turned to her. "Victor Hargrove owns half this town and wants to own the other half. He is used to getting his way. Does not take kindly to being crossed. I should leave. I should not bring this trouble to you and Mr. Whitmore. Too late for that. Besides, I knew what I was doing when I offered you the job. Hargrove does not scare me." "He should. Men like that are dangerous." Caleb helped Beth up onto the wagon seat, his hand under her elbow, careful and impersonal. "Men like that are always dangerous. But they are also usually cowards underneath all that bluster. Push back hard enough, they fold." He swung up beside her and gathered the reins. The horses leaned into their harnesses, and the wagon began to move, wheels creaking, supplies shifting in the back. Beth looked back at Granger as they left, at the dusty streets and false-fronted buildings, at the people who had judged her and found her wanting. She wondered if she would ever see it again, wondered if she wanted to. The road west wound through grassland broken by stands of cottonwood and willow, marking the path of a creek. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It demanded strength, punished weakness, killed the unprepared without malice or mercy. Beth watched the landscape roll past and felt the weight of silence between her and the man beside her. Caleb drove with relaxed competence, his eyes on the road, his hands loose on the reins. He did not seem inclined toward conversation. Beth was grateful. She was too tired, too emotionally wrung out from the past days to make polite talk. But after a mile of silence, she found herself speaking anyway. "Why did you do that, defend me to Mr. Hargrove? You don't know me." "Do not need to know your whole story to see you are getting a raw deal." "People think I killed my husband." "Did you?" The directness of the question was almost shocking. Beth looked at him sharply. "No." "Then that is all I need to know." Beth shook her head. "It is not that simple. There are always complications. Context. Things that look one way but mean another. Maybe. But I have found that most things are actually pretty simple. Either you did something or you did not. Either you are honest or you are not. People like to make things complicated because it gives them room to maneuver, to justify things that should not be justified. That is a very black and white view of the world. World is black and white. It is people who add the gray." Beth was silent for a moment, considering this. "My husband died in a carriage accident. He was driving drunk. I tried to stop him. He would not listen. The carriage overturned. He died. I survived with this." She gestured toward her leg. Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I am sorry. His family blamed me, said I must have done something, wanted his money. There was no money, just debts. But by the time the truth came out, the story was already set. And stories do not change once people decide what they want to believe." "No, they do not." The wagon rolled on. The sun was lower now, painting the grassland gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals, hunting. Beth watched it and envied its freedom, its uncomplicated existence. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Depends on what it is. Why did you really hire me? And please do not say it is just because you need help. There must be other women in town who could keep house and teach a child." Caleb was quiet for so long, Beth thought he was not going to answer. His jaw worked as if he were grinding words between his teeth, testing them before allowing them out. "I saw you at the church, saw how those women treated you, and I saw how you walked away. No tears, no begging, just held your head up and left with dignity. Reminded me of someone." "Your wife?" He nodded. "Rachel. She had that same quality, that thing where she would not break no matter what pressure was applied. She was tough, strong in ways I am not sure I even understood at the time." "What happened to her?" "Diphtheria. Her and my boy Samuel. He was 5. Caleb's voice roughened. "I was on a trail drive. 6 weeks. When I got back, they were already buried." Beth's hand moved toward his on the reins, then stopped. They barely knew each other. Touch would be inappropriate. But the impulse was there, the human desire to offer comfort. "I am so sorry, Caleb." It was the first time she had used his given name. He did not acknowledge it, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "I should have been there, should have done something." "You could not have known." "Does not change it." The words were flat, final, a door closing on discussion. Beth understood. Grief had its own logic, immune to reason or comfort. She had learned that in the weeks after Thomas's death, when well-meaning people had offered platitudes that meant nothing, that bounced off the shell of her sorrow without leaving a mark. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Beth spoke again, her voice quiet. "My husband died 6 months ago. The carriage accident. He had been drinking more and more toward the end, gambling, making poor business decisions. I tried to help, tried to stop him, but he would not listen to me. Men rarely listen to their wives when it comes to serious matters. Some men are fools. Most men, I think, at least in my experience." Caleb glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Cannot argue with that." "The night of the accident, Thomas said something strange. He said he was going to tell the truth, that he was tired of carrying the lie. I asked him what he meant, but he just kept drinking. And then he insisted on driving, and I could not stop him, and—" She trailed off. "And now you will never know what he meant." "No. But sometimes I wonder if it is connected, if there was something more to his death than just an accident." "You think someone killed him?" "I think it is possible. Thomas worked for a bank briefly back in Boston. There was some trouble. Embezzlement. He took the blame, but I always wondered if he was covering for someone else. And then we moved west, and he started drinking more, and that night, that strange comment." Beth shook her head. "I am probably imagining connections that do not exist, making mysteries out of misfortune." "Maybe. Or maybe your instincts are right. Either way, it is over now. You survived. That is what matters. Sometimes I am not sure survival is enough. It is all we have." Caleb said it without drama, simply stating a fact. We survive or we do not. Everything else is just details. Beth looked at him, at this hard man with his grief and his simple philosophies. She wondered if he was right, if survival really was the only thing that mattered, if all the pain and loss and humiliation were just details to be endured on the way to tomorrow. The sun touched the mountains as they crested a rise. Below them, a valley opened up green with grass and the silver thread of a creek running through it. Buildings clustered near the water. A large house, a barn, corrals, smaller structures scattered around. Cattle dotted the hillsides, dark shapes against the gold grass. "Diamond Creek Ranch," Caleb said. Beth stared at it. It looked prosperous, solid, the kind of place built to last. She felt a flutter of something in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the possibility of hope. As they descended toward the ranch, a figure appeared on the porch of the main house. Small, moving quickly. A child, Beth realized. A little girl in a blue dress, her blonde hair catching the last light. The girl ran toward the wagon, then stopped when she saw Beth. Her face showed confusion, curiosity, but not the immediate rejection Beth had grown accustomed to seeing. Caleb brought the wagon to a halt and climbed down. "Lucy, this is Mrs. Sinclair. She is going to be helping your pa around the house and teaching you your letters." Lucy stared at Beth, her eyes dropping to the walking stick. "What happened to your leg?" Children, Beth had learned, did not understand social niceties. They simply asked what they wanted to know. "I was in an accident. It does not work as well as it used to." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes." Lucy considered this with the seriousness of the very young. "My mama died when I was born. That hurt my papa a lot. He cries sometimes at night when he thinks I am asleep." The adults were silent. There was no response adequate to such brutal honesty. "I am sure it does hurt him," Beth said gently. "Losing someone you love is very painful. Can you read stories?" The abrupt change of subject was so typically childlike that Beth almost smiled. "Yes, very well." "Good. Papa tries to read to me, but he falls asleep. The words are too small for his eyes. Can you read me a story tonight?" "If your father says it is all right." "He will." "Papa." Lucy turned and shouted toward the house. "The new lady can read stories." She said so. A man emerged from the house. Tall, perhaps in his mid-40s, with the lean build of someone who worked hard for a living. His face was weathered-lined around the eyes, but kind. He walked with the easy confidence of a man on his own land in his own domain. "Mrs. Sinclair, welcome to Diamond Creek. I am Thaddeus Whitmore." He extended his hand, and Beth shook it, surprised by the gesture. Men of Whitmore's social position did not usually shake hands with the hired help, especially not female hired help. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I appreciate the opportunity." "Caleb tells me you are educated, that you can keep accounts and teach." "Yes, sir. I managed my late husband's business accounts, and I taught Sunday school for several years." "That is more qualification than most. Lucy could use a proper teacher. I do my best, but ranching does not leave much time for education." He looked at his daughter with obvious affection. "Though she is bright as a penny, picks things up quick. I am sure we will get along very well. Lucy, show Mrs. Sinclair to her room, would you? Let her get settled while Caleb and I unload." Lucy grabbed Beth's hand with the unself-conscious trust of children. "This way you are in the blue room. That is the best room after Papa's room. It has a window that looks at the mountains." Beth let herself be led, her stick tapping against the porch boards, then the wooden floor inside. The house was clean, well-maintained, but with the slight disorder of a home without a woman's touch. Books stacked on tables, a coat thrown over a chair, dishes waiting by the sink. The blue room was on the ground floor, small but comfortable. A bed with a blue quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a window that did indeed look toward mountains now turning purple in the dusk, and most importantly, a door with a lock. Lucy watched as Beth set her bag down. "Do you have children, Mrs. Sinclair?" "No, I do not." "Did you want them?" "Once, but it was not to be." "That is sad. You would be a good mama, I can tell." Beth looked at this child, this little girl who spoke with such certainty about things she could not possibly understand. "Thank you, Lucy. That is very kind of you to say." "It is not kind. It is true. I am very good at knowing true things. Papa says I have instincts." "Your papa sounds like a wise man." "He is, but he is lonely. That is why he works all the time, so he does not have to think about being lonely." Beth knelt down, bringing herself to Lucy's eye level despite the protest from her leg. "Lucy, can I tell you something?" "Yes." "I am also lonely and scared. This is all very new to me. But you have made me feel welcome. That is a gift. Thank you." Lucy threw her arms around Beth's neck in a sudden fierce hug. "I am glad you are here, Mrs. Sinclair. I think we are going to be friends." Beth held the child, feeling tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with affection, with simple, uncomplicated kindness. She blinked the tears back and released Lucy gently. "I think so too." That night, after a simple dinner eaten at the kitchen table with Whitmore, Lucy, and Caleb, after Lucy had indeed requested a story, which Beth read by lamplight until the child's eyes grew heavy, Beth lay in her bed in the blue room and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind moving through grass. Somewhere a coyote called to its mate, the sound lonely and wild. Memories of the past few days flooded through her mind. The rejection in town, the unexpected offer of work, the confrontation with Hargrove, the arrival at the ranch, Lucy's innocent acceptance, Whitmore's quiet kindness, and Caleb, that hard man with his grief and his simple sense of right and wrong. She thought about his words. We survive or we do not. Everything else is just details. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival was enough. Maybe she did not need to understand why Thomas died, or clear her name, or find justice. Maybe she just needed to keep going. One day at a time, one task at a time, one moment of kindness to hold against all the cruelty. Beth closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without crying, without the sick dread of tomorrow. She fell asleep with the whisper of a thought that felt dangerous and fragile and precious. Maybe things could be different here. Maybe she had finally found a place where she could stop running, where she could rest, where she could begin again. Outside her window, the stars came out over Wyoming, cold and distant and beautiful, indifferent to human suffering, but also indifferent to human hope. And hope, Beth was beginning to remember, was a stubborn thing, hard to kill completely, always finding a way to grow back tender and green, pushing up through cracked earth. She pulled the blue quilt up to her chin and let herself hope just a little that tomorrow might be better than today, that the next day might be better still, that perhaps impossibly she had been given a second chance, and that this time she would not waste it. The sun had not yet cleared the eastern mountains when Beth woke to the sound of men's voices outside her window. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pinning her hair into a simple bun, smoothing her skirt. Her leg ached from yesterday's journey, but she ignored it. Pain was just another detail to survive. The kitchen was empty when she entered, but coffee sat warming on the stove and the smell of bacon lingered in the air. Someone had already eaten breakfast. Ranch life, she was learning, started before dawn. She found bread and butter in the pantry, eggs in a basket by the door. By the time Lucy appeared sleepy-eyed and tangled-haired, Beth had breakfast ready. "Good morning," Beth said. "Are you hungry?" Lucy climbed onto a chair and nodded. "Papa already ate. He goes out early with the men. Caleb, too. They check the cattle and fix fences and do ranch things." "I see. And what do you usually do while they are working?" "I play, read my books. Sometimes old Jack lets me help in the kitchen, but he says I am more trouble than help." Lucy said this without rancor, simply stating fact. "Who is old Jack?" "The cook. He makes food for the ranch hands. There are 15 men who work here. They live in the bunkhouse and eat in the cookhouse. Old Jack cooks for them every day. He is very old, maybe 100 years. Beth smiled. "I doubt he is quite that old." "Maybe 90 then." After breakfast, Beth set about exploring the house properly. It was larger than it had seemed last night. A parlor with comfortable furniture and shelves of books. An office where Whitmore kept his accounts and records. 4 bedrooms upstairs, though only one appeared to be in use. Lucy's room was filled with toys and dolls and more books than Beth would have expected for a 6-year-old. Everywhere she looked, she saw the signs of a house without a woman. Dust in corners. Windows that needed washing. Mending piled in a basket untouched. Not neglect exactly, but the simple fact that Whitmore and his daughter were doing their best with limited time and skill. Beth found cleaning supplies and set to work. Her leg made some tasks difficult, but she learned to adapt. To sit while she worked when possible. To use the walking stick to reach high places. To move slowly and deliberately rather than quickly and carelessly. By midday, the parlor gleamed. The windows let in clean light. The mending basket was half empty. Beth was sweating despite the coolness of the house, her leg throbbing, but she felt the satisfaction of useful work accomplished. Lucy had been surprisingly helpful, carrying things, dusting surfaces she could reach, chattering constantly about the ranch and her father and the horses and everything else that crossed her mind. Beth learned more about Diamond Creek in one morning of Lucy's monologue than she could have discovered in a week of careful questions. Whitmore owned 3,000 acres. He ran cattle and bred horses. He employed 15 full-time hands plus additional workers during roundup. He was respected in the territory known for fair dealing and quality stock. He paid his debts and expected others to pay theirs. He had been trying to keep house and raise Lucy alone for 6 years and doing a creditable job of both, but everyone agreed he needed help. "Everyone said Papa should remarry," Lucy confided as they folded clean sheets. Mrs. Hargrove tried to introduce him to her sister, but Papa said he was not interested in remarriage for its own sake. He said if he ever married again, it would be because he found someone he actually wanted to share his life with, not just someone to keep house and raise me. Your papa sounds like a man who knows his own mind. He is. That is why people respect him. He does not pretend to be something he is not. Caleb is the same way. That is why they work well together. How long has Caleb worked here? 3 years. He came right after his wife and little boy died. Papa says Caleb was half dead himself when he arrived, just going through motions. But slowly he got better. The ranch helped him. Work helped him. Papa says sometimes work is the best medicine for grief. Beth thought about this as she smoothed a pillowcase. Perhaps Whitmore was right. Perhaps the ache in her leg and the tiredness in her muscles was exactly what she needed. Physical exhaustion that left no energy for dwelling on the past. The afternoon brought a new challenge. Old Jack appeared at the kitchen door, leaning heavily on the frame, his weathered face creased with pain. "Mrs. Sinclair, I hate to bother you, but my back has gone out. Happens sometimes. Cannot hardly move, and I am supposed to cook dinner for the men tonight." Beth looked at the old man, saw genuine distress in his eyes. "How many men?" 15, plus Mr. Whitmore and Caleb. Lucy too, though she eats like a bird. 18 people. Beth had never cooked for more than 4 at a time. But old Jack was clearly in pain, and there was no one else to do it. "Tell me what they like to eat." Old Jack's face relaxed slightly. "You would do that cook for the crew." "I will try, though I make no promises about quality." Quality does not matter much to cowboys. Quantity does. And hot. They like their food hot and plentiful. He talked her through it, sitting at the kitchen table with his hand pressed to his lower back, giving instructions. "Beef stew," he said. "Biscuits. Gravy. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Simple food, but lots of it." Beth worked steadily through the afternoon. Lucy helped where she could, fetching things, stirring when told. The kitchen grew hot from the stove. Beth's dress stuck to her back. Her legs screamed protest every time she moved, but she kept going. This was a test she knew. Not formal, not acknowledged, but a test nonetheless. If she could not do, this could not handle the basic work required, then what good was she? The stew simmered in an enormous pot. The biscuits rose in the oven. Beth made gravy from pan drippings, hoping she had the proportions right. She set out tin plates and cups in the cookhouse, a long building near the bunkhouse with tables and benches. At 6 o'clock men began filing in. They looked at Beth with curiosity and some skepticism. The new housekeeper, the crippled widow from back east. They had heard the stories. Now they would see if she could actually work. Beth stood by the stove, ladling stew into bowls, trying not to show how much her hands shook. The men ate in silence, at first testing the food. Beth held her breath. Then one of them, a young cowboy with red hair and freckles, looked up. "Damn, this is good." Another man nodded agreement. "Better than Jack's, no offense to Jack." Old Jack, who had hobbled over to sit in the corner, grinned. "None taken. Told you she could cook." The tension in Beth's shoulders eased slightly. She served seconds to those who wanted them, which was most of the men. They ate with the focused intensity of people who worked hard and needed fuel. No conversation, no wasted motion, just efficient consumption. Caleb was last to arrive. He took a plate filled. It sat at the end of one table. Beth watched him from the corner of her eye as he ate, trying to read his reaction. His face gave nothing away. He ate methodically, neither fast nor slow, his expression neutral. When he finished, he stood and brought his plate to where Beth was washing dishes. Their eyes met briefly. "Good dinner," he said. Just 2 words delivered flatly, but Beth felt them like a warm hand on her shoulder. Approval. Acknowledgement that she had passed the test. "Thank you." He nodded once and left. Beth returned to the dishes, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Every muscle ached. Her leg felt like someone had driven nails through it. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Satisfaction. The knowledge that she had been given a task and completed it. That she had proven at least for one day that she could do the work required. The evening sky was purple and orange when she finally made her way back to the main house. Whitmore sat on the porch smoking a pipe, Lucy drowsing against his shoulder. "Heard you saved the day," he said. "Jack's grateful. So am I." It was nothing. It was not nothing. Feeding 15 hungry men is significant work. And doing it on your first full day here with no warning while also cleaning the house and watching Lucy. He shook his head. "That is more than nothing, Mrs. Sinclair. That is proof you can handle whatever this ranch throws at you." Beth felt tears prick her eyes. Simple kindness, simple acknowledgement of effort, and she was nearly undone by it. How starved had she been for basic human decency. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Call me Thaddeus when it is just us. Mr. Whitmore makes me feel old." "Then you must call me Beth." "Beth it is." He stood carefully shifting Lucy in his arms. The girl mumbled but did not wake. "Get some rest. You have earned it." Beth watched him carry his daughter inside, then remained on the porch, looking out at the darkening land. Somewhere in the distance, cattle called to each other. Closer in the bunkhouse, she could hear men's voices, laughter, the ordinary sounds of a community settling for the night. She had been here less than 2 days. But already something had shifted. The tight knot of fear in her chest had loosened slightly. Not gone, probably never gone completely, but less constricting. She could breathe a little easier. A figure moved in the shadows near the barn. Caleb, she realized. He stood smoking, his silhouette sharp against the last light. As if feeling her gaze, he looked toward the house. Their eyes met across the distance, neither waved or called out. They simply looked at each other for a long moment before Caleb turned and walked away. Beth went inside to her blue room. She locked the door, washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her nightgown. The bed felt like heaven when she lowered herself onto it. Her leg throbbed with a deep bone-level ache. But she had survived another day. Had done more than survive, had worked, had contributed, had been useful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight she could rest. And rest after so many nights of fear and uncertainty was its own kind of grace. The week that followed established a rhythm. Beth rose early, made breakfast, cleaned house, taught Lucy her letters and numbers for 2 hours each morning. Lucy was a quick student, eager to learn, full of questions about everything. Teaching her was a joy Beth had not anticipated. Afternoons were for other work. Mending, baking, helping old Jack when his back troubled him, which was often. The ranch hands grew accustomed to seeing her in the cookhouse. They greeted her politely, ate what she prepared, offered rough compliments. Beth learned their names, their preferences, their habits. She learned that ranching was harder work than she had imagined, that the men left before dawn and often did not return until after dark, that injuries were common and accepted as part of the job, that the land demanded everything and gave back only what you could force from it through sweat and stubbornness. She also learned that she had a talent for keeping accounts. Whitmore's ledgers were a mess, numbers scrawled hastily, calculations that did not quite add up. Beth asked permission to reorganize them and spent several evenings copying figures into neat columns, finding errors, presenting Whitmore with a clearer picture of the ranch's finances than he had seen in years. "You have a head for numbers," he said, reviewing her work with obvious approval. "My father insisted I learn. He said a woman needed to understand money as much as any man, perhaps more, since we were so often at the mercy of men's financial decisions. Your father was a wise man. In some ways. In others he was quite foolish. He valued education for me but wanted to control how I used it. wanted me to marry well and manage my husband's household efficiently, but not to have opinions or ambitions of my own. And you had opinions and ambitions. I had thoughts about how the world worked and how it might work better. That was enough to make me difficult." Whitmore smiled. "I am starting to understand why you ended up out here instead of in some Boston parlor sipping tea and discussing the weather." "Yes, well, the West is where difficult women go when the East spits them out." The words came out more bitter than Beth intended. Whitmore studied her face for a moment, then spoke quietly. "The East's loss is our gain, then." It was not yet Sunday when Caleb asked Beth to walk with him after dinner. Not asked exactly. More stated. "Going to check the north pasture. You should come. See the ranch." Beth was surprised but agreed. Lucy had already gone to bed tired from a day spent helping old Jack bake bread. Whitmore had ridden into town for a meeting. The evening was mild, the sky still holding light though the sun had set. They walked slowly, accommodating Beth's pace without making it obvious. Caleb did not offer his arm or try to help. He simply walked beside her, matching his stride to hers, letting her navigate the uneven ground at her own speed. "You settling in?" he asked, after they had walked in silence for several minutes. "Yes. Everyone has been very kind." "You are doing good work. Men notice that. Respect it." "I am trying. More than trying. Succeeding." They reached a fence line and stopped. Below them the valley spread out dark now, except for the occasional light from the ranch buildings. Above, stars were beginning to appear more than Beth had ever seen in Boston, a river of light across the black sky. "It is beautiful here," she said. "Hard, too. But yeah, beautiful." "Do you ever think about leaving, going somewhere easier?" "No." The word was flat, certain. "This is where I am supposed to be. Do not know how I know that, but I do. This land, this work, it is what is keeping me alive." "I understand that. Work is medicine." "Yeah." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That thing you said about your husband, about him saying he was going to tell the truth. You really think there was more to his death than an accident?" Beth considered how much to say. But Caleb had proven himself trustworthy, and she was tired of carrying the weight of her suspicions alone. "Thomas worked for a bank in Boston, Hargrove Bank." Caleb's head turned sharply. "Hargrove, Victor Hargrove. I do not know if it is the same family, but the name is unusual. It seems likely. There was trouble at the bank, money missing. Thomas was blamed. He lost his position, and we had to leave Boston. But Thomas always maintained he had not taken the money, that he was covering for someone else." "Why would he do that?" "Fear, maybe, or blackmail. I never knew the full story. He would not tell me. But that night, the night of the accident, he was drinking heavily and talking about telling the truth, about not carrying the lie anymore. And then he died. And I have always wondered if the two things were connected." Caleb was silent, absorbing this. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Hargrove runs the only bank in Granger, has for 20 years. He is rich, powerful, connected. If he is willing to threaten and intimidate over you taking a job, what would he do to protect himself from a theft accusation? I have no proof, just suspicions, and the word of a dead drunk against a respected banker means nothing. Maybe not, but it is something to keep in mind. Hargrove is not a man to underestimate." They stood looking at the valley. A coyote called somewhere in the darkness. Another answered. "Beth," Caleb's voice was quiet, "I need you to understand something. You are under my protection now. Whitmore's too. Anyone comes at you, they have to go through us first. That includes Hargrove. I do not want to cause trouble. Trouble is already here, has been since you set foot in this territory. Question is how we handle it." Beth looked at him. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and angles, but his eyes, those gray eyes, held steady on hers. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Caleb looked away out at the darkness. "I told you. You remind me of Rachel, her strength, her refusal to quit." He paused. "But it is more than that now. You fit here. You work hard. You treat people with respect. Lucy adores you. Whitmore says you are the best thing that has happened to this ranch in years. And I agree with him." He looked back at her. "You belong here, Beth, and I will fight to keep you here if that is what it takes." Something in Beth's chest cracked open at those words. She had been so alone for so long, fighting every battle by herself, and now this hard man with his grief and his scars was offering her something she had not dared hope for: protection, partnership, belonging. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet. We do not know what is coming." But something was coming. Beth could feel it in the air, a gathering pressure like the weight before a storm. And when it arrived 3 days later, it came with fire and smoke and the smell of fear. Beth woke to shouting, to men running, to the frantic clanging of a bell. She grabbed her robe and stumbled to the window. Orange light flickered in the darkness. The barn. The barn was on fire. She dressed frantically, her fingers clumsy with buttons. By the time she reached outside, half the ranch had formed a bucket line from the creek. Men passed water hand to hand, throwing it on flames that seemed to laugh at their efforts. Horses screamed in terror. Cattle in nearby pens bellowed and stamped. Caleb and Whitmore were inside the barn leading horses out. The animals fought them, maddened by smoke and fire, but the men persisted. One by one the horses emerged wild-eyed and trembling. Beth joined the bucket line, ignoring the protests of men who thought she should stay back. She passed buckets until her arms ached, until her dress was soaked with water and sweat, until the fire began to lose its hold and die back to sullen coals. Dawn found them exhausted faces black with soot, staring at the damage. Half the barn was gone, hay stores destroyed, tools and tack lost. But the horses had been saved. No lives lost. Given how bad it could have been, they were lucky. Whitmore walked through the ruins with old Jack and several ranch hands examining what remained. Caleb stood apart, his face unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. Beth approached him carefully. "Caleb, arson." The word was flat, certain. "How do you know?" "Found kerosene cans, hidden in the corner where the fire started. This was not an accident." Beth felt ice in her stomach. "Who would do this?" Caleb looked at her. His eyes were hard. "Who do you think? Hargrove? Of course. Who else had motive? Who else had been crossed publicly?" Beth remembered his words at the livery. "You are making an enemy heart." "We cannot prove it," she said. "No, but we both know." Whitmore joined them, his face grim. "Caleb's right. This was deliberate. Question is what we do about it." "Go to the sheriff," Beth suggested. Whitmore shook his head. "Martin Drake is Hargrove's man. Has been for years. He will take a report, nod sympathetically, and do nothing." "Then what?" "We rebuild. We watch our backs. And we wait for Hargrove to make a mistake." Whitmore looked at Beth. "I am sorry. This is because of you, because I hired you." "No." Caleb's voice was sharp. "This is because Hargrove is a bastard who thinks he owns this valley. Beth is just an excuse. He has been looking for a reason to come after Diamond Creek for years." "Maybe so. But she is the trigger." Beth felt the weight of their gazes, felt the guilt pressing down on her shoulders. "I should leave. I should not bring this trouble to you." "You are not leaving." Caleb's tone left no room for argument. "That is what he wants, for you to run, to prove that he can intimidate anyone who crosses him. We do not give him that satisfaction. But more people could be hurt. More people will be hurt if we show weakness. Hargrove respects one thing, strength, so we show him strength." Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Caleb's right. We stand firm. But we need to be smart about this. Increase patrols. Keep watch at night. Make sure nothing else burns." The days after the fire were tense. Men worked in shifts, always alert, always watching. Beth found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. But life on the ranch continued. Work did not stop because of fear. Lucy seemed unaware of the danger. or perhaps children simply processed threat differently. She continued her lessons with Beth, continued playing in the yard, continued asking endless questions about everything. Her innocence was both precious and terrifying. Beth found herself more protective of the child than she would have thought possible after knowing her such a short time. It was Lucy who provided the breakthrough. A week after the fire, she came running into the kitchen where Beth was preparing bread dough. Mrs. Beth, there is a man at the door. He says he needs to talk to Papa, but Papa is out with the cattle. Should I get Caleb?" "Who is the man?" "I do not know. He looks scared." Beth wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. A young man stood there, perhaps 20, thin and nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting attack. He held his hat in his hands, worrying the brim. "Can I help you?" Beth asked. "I need to speak to Mr. Whitmore. It is important." "He is not here at the moment. I am Mrs. Sinclair, the housekeeper. Perhaps I can take a message." The young man hesitated, looked around again, then leaned closer and spoke quietly. "My name is Samuel Green. I work at Hargrove's bank, as a clerk. I heard about the fire, and I know who said it because I overheard Mr. Hargrove giving orders to have it done." Beth's breath caught. "You are certain?" "Yes, ma'am. I heard him clear as day, telling 2 men he would pay them to burn the Diamond Creek barn. He said it was time to teach Whitmore a lesson about harboring undesirables." "Why are you telling us this?" Samuel's face twisted with shame. "Because it is not right. I have worked for Mr. Hargrove for 3 years. I have looked the other way at things I should not have. But burning a barn, that is a step too far. Someone could have died, and I cannot just stay silent anymore." "Wait here." Beth hurried to the barn where Caleb was working. She explained quickly. His face went hard. "Bring him to the office. I will get Whitmore." An hour later they sat around Whitmore's desk. Samuel Green, shaking but determined, told his story in full. He had heard Hargrove give orders, had seen money change hands, could identify the 2 men hired to set the fire. "Will you testify to this?" Whitmore asked. "That is why I am here, sir, to offer my testimony. I know it might cost me my job, maybe worse, but I cannot stay quiet." "Hargrove will come after you," Caleb warned. "He will not take betrayal lightly." "I know, but I have been thinking about something my father used to say, that a man has to be able to look at himself in the mirror. And lately, when I look in the mirror, I do not much like what I see." Whitmore extended his hand. "You are a brave man, Mr. Green. I will make sure you are protected. And if you need new employment after this is done, Diamond Creek will have a place for you." After Samuel left, promising to return with written testimony, Whitmore turned to Caleb and Beth. "This changes things. With a witness, we can go over the sheriff's head, straight to the territorial marshal, force an investigation." "Hargrove will not sit idle while we build a case," Caleb said. "No, which means we need to move fast, and we need to be careful. A cornered rat is a dangerous thing." Beth had been quiet thinking. Now she spoke. "There is something else, something I should have mentioned before, but I was not sure it was relevant." Both men looked at her. "Thomas, my husband. Before he died, he said he was going to tell the truth, that he was tired of carrying the lie. I did not know what he meant then, but what if it was about the bank? What if Hargrove embezzled money and framed Thomas for it? What if Thomas was planning to expose him, and that is why he died?" Caleb and Whitmore exchanged glances. "If that is true," Whitmore said slowly, "then Hargrove is not just a bully. He is a murderer. I have no proof, just suspicions. But the timing is strange, and the connection through the bank cannot be coincidence." Caleb stood and began pacing. "So we have arson we can prove, and possible murder we cannot. Hargrove is more dangerous than we thought." "Which means we need to be more careful than we thought," Whitmore added. Beth looked between them. These 2 men who had taken her in, given her a chance, and now found themselves in danger because of her past. She should feel guilty, should offer again to leave. But something had changed in the past weeks. She had changed. She was no longer the desperate woman on the bench outside the hotel. She was part of something now, part of a household, a community, a fight. and she had learned something important. Running did not solve problems. It just moved them to a new location. Eventually, you had to stand and face whatever was chasing you. Make a choice, stay or go, fight or surrender. Beth had spent 6 months running. She was done. "What is the plan?" she asked. Whitmore smiled a fierce expression that had nothing to do with happiness. "We gather evidence, we document everything, we contact the territorial marshal, and we make Victor Hargrove answer for what he has done." "He will fight back," Caleb warned. "Let him. We are not afraid." But even as Whitmore spoke those brave words, even as they made their plans and prepared their case, Beth felt the shadow of coming trouble. Hargrove had too much to lose. He would not go quietly. And when men like him were cornered, they became unpredictable, violent. The storm was coming. All they could do was prepare to weather it. That night, Beth sat with Lucy on the porch reading from a book of fairy tales. The girl leaned against her warm and trusting. Across the yard, Caleb stood watch, a rifle in his hand, scanning the darkness. Whitmore was checking the barn, making rounds, ensuring everything was secure. "Mrs. Beth," Lucy's voice was drowsy. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to stay here forever?" Beth's hand stilled on the page. "I do not know about forever, but I am not planning to leave any time soon." "Good, because I love you. You are like a mama to me." Beth felt tears sting her eyes. "Oh, Lucy, I love you too." "Then you have to stay, because mamas do not leave." Simple words, a child's logic, but they cut through all of Beth's complicated thoughts and fears and doubts. Lucy loved her, needed her, and Beth, who had thought she would never have a child to care for, to teach to love, had somehow found one anyway. She kissed the top of Lucy's head. "I will stay, I promise, even if bad things happen." Beth looked across the yard at Caleb's silhouette, at the barn that was half destroyed but still standing, at the land that was harsh and beautiful and demanding, especially if bad things happen, because that is when you need family most. And you are my family now, Lucy. You and your papa and Caleb and this ranch. This is where I belong. Lucy snuggled closer. "I am glad." Beth held the child and watched the stars come out cold and distant and indifferent. The future was uncertain. Danger was coming. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Beth was not alone. She had people who cared about her, work that mattered, a place that felt like home. Whatever Hargrove threw at them, they would face it together, and together maybe they would be strong enough to survive. The territorial marshal's office was 3 days' ride from Granger. Caleb volunteered to go to deliver Samuel Green's written testimony and their collected evidence of Hargrove's crimes. Whitmore would stay to protect the ranch and, though unspoken, to protect Lucy and Beth. "Watch your back," Whitmore said as Caleb prepared to leave. "Hargrove has eyes everywhere. If he knows what you are doing, he will try to stop you. Let him try." Caleb swung into the saddle, his rifle secured in its scabbard saddlebags heavy with documents. He looked down at Beth, who had come to see him off. "Do not take chances while I am gone. Stay close to the house. Keep Lucy inside as much as possible." "We will be careful." "I mean it, Beth. Hargrove is desperate now. Desperate men do desperate things." "I understand." He held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them. Then he turned his horse and rode north, becoming a small figure against the vast landscape before disappearing entirely. Beth watched until she could no longer see him, feeling an unexpected hollowness in her chest. In the weeks since arriving at Diamond Creek, Caleb had become a constant presence. Not intrusive, not demanding, but always there. Solid, dependable, safe. Now he was gone, and the ranch felt suddenly vulnerable. The first day passed quietly. Too quietly. Beth worked through her usual routine teaching, Lucy managing the house, helping old Jack with meals. But underneath the normalcy, tension hummed like a plucked wire. The ranch hands were on edge. Whitmore carried his rifle everywhere. Even Lucy seemed to sense something wrong, asking fewer questions than usual, staying closer to Beth. The second day brought trouble. Beth was in the kitchen working on accounts when she heard horses, multiple riders approaching fast. She stood and moved to the window, Lucy coming to stand beside her. Sheriff Martin Drake and 5 deputies reined in before the house. Drake was a broad man in his 50s with the slack face of someone who had spent too many years looking the other way while corruption flourished. He dismounted heavily and strode toward the door. Whitmore emerged from the barn, rifle held casually but with clear intent. "Sheriff Drake, what brings you out to Diamond Creek?" "Official business, Whitmore. Step aside." "What kind of official business?" Drake pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "Warrant for the arrest of Elizabeth Sinclair. Charges of theft and fraud." Beth felt the floor tilt beneath her. She gripped the table for support. Beside her, Lucy made a small sound of distress. Whitmore's voice carried through the open window. "Theft and fraud. That is absurd. Mrs. Sinclair has been here for weeks. She has not stolen anything." "Got witnesses say different. She allegedly stole $200 from your household accounts. Also forged documents. Judge signed the warrant this morning. Now are you going to hand her over, or do we have a problem?" Beth's mind raced. This was Hargrove's move. False charges, paid witnesses, a corrupt judge, the system weaponized against her, and with Caleb gone, no one to push back as forcefully as needed. She straightened her shoulders, looked down at Lucy. "It will be all right. Stay here with your papa." "No, Mrs. Beth, you cannot go with them." "I have to, but I will come back, I promise." Beth kissed Lucy's forehead, then walked to the door before the situation could escalate into violence. She emerged onto the porch, Drake's eyes fixed on her with something like satisfaction. "Mrs. Sinclair, you are under arrest. Come along quietly, and we will have no trouble." "On what evidence?" Beth demanded. "I have not stolen anything." "That is for the judge to decide. Right now you are coming with me." Whitmore stepped between them. "I will not allow this. Those charges are fabricated and everyone knows it. Step aside, Whitmore. Do not make this harder than it has to be." "Or what? You will arrest me too. On what grounds?" "Obstruction of justice, harboring a criminal. I can find grounds if I need to." Beth put her hand on Whitmore's arm. "It is all right. Let me go. Fighting will only make things worse." "Beth, I cannot just let them take you." "You can, and you will. Because Lucy needs you here. The ranch needs you. And I need you to trust that this will work out." She was lying. She had no idea if it would work out. But escalating to violence would end badly for everyone. At least this way there was a chance. Whitmore's jaw clenched, but he lowered the rifle. "I will have a lawyer in town by morning." "Do not bother. We both know no lawyer in Granger will work against Hargrove." Beth turned to Drake. "I am ready." They bound her hands. Not tightly, but the humiliation was the point. They put her on a horse, though, with her leg, and bound hands mounting was difficult. Drake watched with cold satisfaction as she struggled. The ride to town was silent. Beth focused on staying in the saddle, on not falling, on maintaining what little dignity remained. Her mind worked through possibilities and came up with nothing encouraging. If Hargrove controlled the judge, the sheriff, the witnesses, then she had no chance. The trial would be a formality. She would be convicted and sentenced, probably imprisoned, and from prison she would have no way to fight back, unless Caleb succeeded with the marshal, unless help came in time. But that was 3 days away at minimum, and Beth had no confidence the law would move quickly even with evidence. Granger's jail was a squat stone building behind the sheriff's office. 2 cells, both currently empty. Drake opened one and gestured for Beth to enter. She did, moving carefully, her legs screaming protest from the ride. The door clanged shut. The lock turned. "Trial is set for day after tomorrow," Drake said. "Judge Blackwell will hear the case. Until then, you stay here. May I send a message to Diamond Creek?" "No visitors, no messages. Judge's orders." "That is not legal. Take it up with the judge." Drake walked away, his boots loud on the stone floor. Beth was alone. She sat on the narrow cot and looked at her cell. Bare walls. a bucket in the corner, a small barred window too high to see through. This was what she had feared since leaving Boston, this return to powerlessness, to being at the mercy of men who saw her only as an inconvenience to be disposed of. But she was not the same woman who had fled Boston 6 months ago. That woman had been broken, defeated, ready to give up. This woman had worked hard, had proven herself, had found people who valued her, had become part of something larger than herself. This woman would not go quietly. She spent the afternoon examining every inch of her cell, looking for weakness, for opportunity. Found none. The walls were solid stone. The door was heavy iron. The window was too small and too high. There was no escape, not physically. As evening fell, bringing shadows that turned the cell from merely depressing to oppressive, Beth heard footsteps. A visitor. Her heart leaped with hope. Whitmore. A lawyer despite his pessimism. Neither. Victor Hargrove stepped into view, impeccably dressed, carrying a leather folder. He nodded to Drake, who had accompanied him, then waited for the sheriff to retreat before speaking. "Mrs. Sinclair, how unfortunate to see you in these circumstances." Beth said nothing, waited. "I am here to offer you a way out, a solution that benefits us both." "I am listening." "Withdraw your accusations. Convince Whitmore and that damned foreman of his to drop their investigation. Tell the judge you invented the theft charges against yourself out of guilt and confusion. Do this, and I will drop all charges against you. You will be free to go. And if I refuse, then you will be convicted. I have 3 witnesses prepared to testify they saw you take money from Whitmore's accounts. I have forged documents with your signature. The evidence is overwhelming. You will spend the next 5 years in the territorial prison. You are remarkably confident in your corruption." Hargrove smiled. "I built this town. The bank, the businesses, the prosperity everyone enjoys. I decide who succeeds and who fails. And right now, Mrs. Sinclair, you are failing. Because I dared to work for someone without your permission, because I did not show proper deference to your wife. Because you are a complication, an outsider with a murdering past, stirring up trouble where none existed before. My wife was right. We have standards in this community, and you do not meet them." Beth stood, moved to the bars, looked Hargrove in the eyes. "You murdered my husband." The words hung in the air. Hargrove's smile faltered for just an instant. "That is a serious accusation, one you cannot possibly prove. Thomas worked for your bank in Boston. He discovered you were embezzling. You framed him for the theft, had him dismissed. But he was going to tell the truth, so you arranged an accident, made sure the brake line was cut, and when the carriage overturned you thought your secret died with him." Hargrove's face had gone very still. "You are delusional." "Am I? Or did you assume the crippled widow would be too busy surviving to ask questions, that no one would believe her even if she did?" Beth leaned closer to the bars. "You are not as clever as you think, Mr. Hargrove. You are just a small man with a little power in a little town, and eventually your lies will catch up to you." For a moment, genuine rage showed through Hargrove's civilized mask. His hand moved toward her as if to strike through the bars, then stopped, controlled himself. When he spoke, his voice was cold. "You should have taken my offer, Mrs. Sinclair. Now you will have the full measure of what refusing me costs. And when you are rotting in prison, remember this moment. Remember that you chose this." He turned and walked away, calling for Drake. Beth heard them conferring in low voices, then the sound of the outer door closing. Silence returned. Beth sat back on the cot. Her hands were shaking. She had gambled and likely lost, but something in her refused to regret it. Better to lose with truth than win with lies. Night fell completely. The cell grew dark and cold. Beth wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders and tried to think. Caleb would not be back for at least 2 more days. The trial was the day after tomorrow. She had no lawyer, no witnesses, no way to prove her innocence against manufactured evidence. But Samuel Green knew the truth. If he could be convinced to testify despite the danger his words might carry weight, he was Hargrove's own employee. His testimony would be damaging. The problem was reaching him, convincing him, before the trial. Beth lay down on the cot and closed her eyes. Sleep would not come, but she forced herself to rest, to conserve energy. Whatever came tomorrow, she would need her strength. Footsteps woke her. Beth opened her eyes to darkness, sat up carefully. More footsteps, trying to be quiet but failing on the stone floor. "Mrs. Sinclair." A whisper, young, frightened. "Lucy, Lucy, what are you doing here?" A small face appeared at the bars, pale in the gloom. "I snuck away. Papa does not know. I had to see if you were all right." "You should not have come. It is dangerous." "I do not care. You are in trouble because of me. Because you came to teach me and keep house for us. It is not fair." Beth's heart broke a little. "Oh, sweetheart, this is not your fault. None of this is your fault. Can I tell you a secret?" Lucy's voice dropped even lower. "Of course. Caleb did not just go to the marshal. Before he left, he sent word to people he knows, other ranchers, friends from the war. He said if things went bad while he was gone, they would come. I heard him talking to Papa." Hope stirred in Beth's chest. "How many people?" "I do not know, but Papa said it was enough. He said if Hargrove tried anything, he would regret it." "Lucy, you need to go back now, before someone realizes you are gone." "I love you, Mrs. Beth. I love you too. Now go, quickly." The small face disappeared, soft footsteps retreating, then silence. Beth lay back down, but now her mind was working. Caleb had made contingency plans, had called in allies, which meant help might be closer than she thought. She just had to survive until it arrived. The trial, when it came, was held in a room above the saloon that served as Granger's courthouse. Judge Blackwell presided, a jowly man in his 60s who kept glancing at Hargrove as if seeking approval. Beth stood alone at the defendant's table. No lawyer had materialized despite Whitmore's best efforts. The prosecution's case was efficient and damning. 3 witnesses testified to seeing Beth take money from Whitmore's office. Documents were produced showing her signature authorizing transfers. The evidence was completely fabricated, but it was also completely convincing to anyone who did not know better. Beth was given a chance to speak in her own defense. She kept it simple. "Every word you have heard is a lie. Every document is forged. I have stolen nothing. This prosecution is revenge by a man whose wife I offended and whose crimes I threatened to expose. I cannot prove my innocence alone, but I can promise you that the truth will come out. And when it does, everyone in this room will have to answer for the injustice they participated in today." Judge Blackwell barely looked at her. "The evidence speaks for itself. Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair, you are found guilty of theft and fraud. I sentence you to 5 years in the territorial prison. You will be transported there within the week. Court is dismissed." The gavel fell. Beth felt the words like a physical blow. 5 years. 5 years taken from her life based on lies. She looked across the room at Hargrove, who watched with undisguised satisfaction. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Caleb strode in, followed by a man in a marshal's uniform. Behind them, at least a dozen armed men filled the doorway. "This trial is suspended," the marshal announced, his voice carrying authority. "I am Marshal William Trent, and I have a warrant for the arrest of Victor Hargrove on charges of arson, fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to murder." The room erupted in chaos. Hargrove stood, his face draining of color. "This is outrageous. I demand to see this warrant. You will see it in your cell." Trent gestured to his deputies. "Take him." As Hargrove was led away, still protesting, still threatening, Caleb crossed to Beth. Their eyes met. She saw exhaustion in his face, relief, and something else she could not quite name. "Told you I would be back," he said quietly. "You cut it close." "Yeah, but we made it." Marshal Trent approached. "Mrs. Sinclair, I apologize for what you have endured. This trial is void. You are free to go." Beth looked at Judge Blackwell, who was trying to disappear into his chair, at Sheriff Drake, who had gone pale, at the spectators who had been so ready to see her convicted. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we do a real investigation," Trent said. with real evidence and real justice. Mr. Hart has provided substantial documentation of Hargrove's crimes. Combined with testimony from his own bank clerk and others, we have a strong case. Hargrove will face trial, a legitimate one this time." Beth nodded. She felt numb, hollowed out, unable to fully process that it was over, that she was safe, that somehow impossibly justice was actually going to be served. Caleb touched her elbow gently. "Let us get you out of here." They walked out together into afternoon sunlight that felt like absolution. A crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Beth saw faces she recognized, some hostile, some curious, some surprisingly sympathetic. And standing at the front, held tight in Whitmore's arms, was Lucy. When the girl saw Beth, she broke free and ran, throwing herself at Beth with such force that Beth nearly fell. "You are free. You are really free." Beth held the child, feeling tears she had held back for days finally spilling over. "I am free, thanks to your papa and Caleb and a lot of very brave people." Whitmore approached his relief evident. "Beth, thank God. When they convicted you, I thought we had lost. So did I. For a moment there, I genuinely believed I would spend the next 5 years in prison. Would not have let that happen," Caleb said, "even if I had to break you out myself." Beth looked at him, saw he was not joking. This hard man with his rough edges and hidden kindness would have risked everything to save her. The knowledge made her throat tight. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He nodded once. That was all. But it was enough. They returned to Diamond Creek as the sun set, painting the valley gold and purple. Lucy chattered the entire way, releasing nervous energy through words. Whitmore and Caleb rode in companionable silence. Beth simply existed, allowing the enormity of the past days to slowly sink in. She had been arrested, tried, convicted, and saved at literally the last moment. It was the kind of drama that would be hard to believe if she had not lived it. But underneath the drama was a simpler truth. She had found people who cared enough to fight for her, to risk themselves for her sake. That was the real miracle. That night, after Lucy had finally been coaxed into bed after Whitmore had retired to his room, Beth found Caleb on the porch. He stood in his usual spot looking out at darkness, smoking. She joined him quietly. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. "Too much in my head." "Yeah, I know that feeling." They stood in silence for a while. Then Beth spoke. "What you did, riding through the night to reach the marshal, calling in favors, gathering people to stand with us, that was beyond anything I could have expected." "It needed doing. You could have let them take me. Would have been easier, safer for the ranch. Would not have been right." Beth looked at him, at his profile in the starlight. "Why do you care so much, Caleb? Really? Not the easy answer about me reminding you of Rachel. The real answer." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face her. "Because somewhere along the way, I stopped just respecting you and started caring about you, as more than an employee, more than a reminder of my wife. You, Beth. Just you." His words hung in the air between them. Beth felt her heart begin to race. "Caleb, I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know you have been through hell and probably need time to recover, not some broken-down cowboy confessing feelings you did not ask for." He looked away. "But when I thought Hargrove might actually succeed in taking you away and locking you up for something you did not do, I realized I could not keep it to myself anymore." Beth reached out, touched his hand. "Look at me." He did. "I care about you too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep my distance. But the truth is, you are the first person in longer than I can remember who has made me feel safe, seen, valued." She paused. "When I was in that cell, one of the things I thought about was never getting to see you again, and that hurt almost as much as the thought of losing my freedom." Caleb's hand turned fingers intertwining with hers. "So what do we do about this?" "I do not know. Take it slow. See where it goes." "I can do slow." They stood holding hands, looking out at the darkness, neither quite ready to take the next step, but both acknowledging that something had shifted between them. That the foundation they had been building brick by careful brick was solid enough to support more weight. "Caleb, yeah, thank you for coming back for me." "Always will, as long as you want me to." Beth leaned her head against his shoulder, felt him stiffen in surprise, then relax. His free arm came around her carefully, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She did not want to. They stood like that until the cold drove them inside, parted with quiet goodnights and unspoken promises. Beth lay in her blue room and thought about second chances, about how life could turn on moments of courage and kindness, about how she had come to Wyoming expecting nothing and found almost everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hargrove's trial, the damage to the ranch from the fire, the slow work of rebuilding trust in town. But tonight she could rest, could feel safe, could allow herself to hope for a future she had not dared imagine. Outside, the stars wheeled across their ancient paths. The land held its secrets. And Beth Sinclair, who had arrived in Granger as a woman with nothing left to lose, closed her eyes and slept the sleep of someone who had finally found a place to belong. The weeks following Marshall Trent's arrival and Beth's release from the false charges passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. The corrupt trial against her had been declared void. Now it was Hargrove's turn to face real justice. Victor Hargrove sat in the Granger jail, the same cell Beth had occupied just weeks before. Marshall Trent had taken over the investigation personally. Life on the ranch continued its rhythms. Cattle needed tending. Fences required mending. Lucy still demanded her lessons and stories. But underneath the ordinary surface, everyone waited for the storm that had not quite finished breaking. Documents were seized from the bank. Witnesses were interviewed properly without intimidation. The case against Hargrove grew stronger each day. But Hargrove was not done fighting. His lawyers descended on Granger like well-dressed vultures, filing motions demanding hearings, challenging every piece of evidence. They argued that Hargrove was a pillar of the community, victim of a conspiracy by disgruntled ranchers who resented his success. They painted Caleb as a violent man with a grudge, Whitmore as a failed businessman, jealous of Hargrove's prosperity, Beth as a criminal using false accusations to deflect from her own crimes. The narrative was absurd to anyone who knew the truth. But narratives, Beth had learned, did not need to be true to be effective. They just needed to be repeated often enough, loudly enough by people with money and influence. The trial was set for late summer. As the date approached, tension in Granger increased. The town divided sharply. Those who had benefited from Hargrove's loans and influence stood by him. Those he had exploited quietly hoped for justice. Most people simply kept their heads down and waited to see which way the wind would blow. Beth tried to focus on work, on routine, on the small dailiness of life that provided structure and sanity. But she found herself drawn again and again to Whitmore's office, where the evidence against Hargrove was compiled and organized. She helped sort documents, cross-reference accounts, build the case that would either free them from Hargrove's shadow or condemn them to his revenge. It was during one of these sessions, 3 weeks before the trial, that Samuel Green arrived at the ranch unannounced. He looked thinner than Beth remembered, his face lined with stress. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Sinclair, I need to tell you something." His voice shook slightly. "Hargrove's lawyers approached me. They offered me $5,000 to recant my testimony, to say I made everything up because I was angry about being dismissed from the bank." Whitmore's face darkened. "Did you take it?" "No, sir. But they said if I did not take the money there would be consequences. They implied my family might be in danger. My mother still lives in town. She is elderly, dependent on me." Beth felt ice in her stomach. This was how Hargrove operated, not just through corruption, but through fear, through targeting the vulnerable people his enemies loved. "What do you want to do?" Whitmore asked quietly. Samuel looked between them, his hands twisting his hat. "I want to tell the truth, but I am scared. Not for myself, but for my mother. If something happened to her because of me—" Caleb, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke. "Where does your mother live?" "On Elm Street. Small house near the church. She can stay here, at the ranch, until after the trial. We have room. She will be safe." Samuel's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "We protect our own. You stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to stay silent. That makes you one of us." Samuel's composure cracked. He covered his face with his hands for a moment, shoulders shaking. When he looked up again, tears streaked his cheeks. "Thank you. I cannot tell you what this means." By that evening, Samuel's mother, a tiny bird-like woman named Dorothy, was installed in one of the upstairs bedrooms. She immediately took over much of the cooking, insisting she needed to earn her keep despite everyone's protests. Lucy was delighted to have another grandmother figure to dote on her. Beth watched the household expand and adapt, watched how easily these people folded strangers into their protection, and felt a fierce love for this place and these people who had taken her in when she had nothing. As summer deepened toward its peak, more people arrived at Diamond Creek seeking safety or offering support. A rancher named Tom Brennan, who had lost his land to Hargrove's predatory loans, came with his wife and teenage son asking for work. Whitmore hired them immediately. 2 former bank employees appeared with their own stories of Hargrove's corruption, their own evidence to contribute. The ranch became a fortress of resistance. Armed men patrolled at night. Women and children stayed close to the main buildings. Everyone understood that Hargrove, though jailed, still had resources and allies who might act on his behalf. The night before the trial, Whitmore called everyone together in the main house. The parlor was crowded with people who had become, through shared danger and common purpose, something like a family. "Tomorrow," Whitmore said, standing before the fireplace, "we tell the truth in open court. We show Granger and the territory what Victor Hargrove really is. Not a pillar of the community, but a thief and a bully who has prospered through other people's suffering." He paused, looking around the room. "I know some of you are scared. I know testifying against a man like Hargrove takes courage, but I also know that silence only protects evil. Speaking truth is how we take back our power." Old Jack spoke up from his chair in the corner. "What if they do not believe us? What if his lawyers twist everything around? Then we will have tried. We will have stood up instead of bowing down, and that matters regardless of the outcome." Beth watched faces around the room. Saw fear, yes, but also determination. These were people who had been pushed too far, who had finally found their line in the sand. That night, she could not sleep. She rose and walked out onto the porch, needing air, needing space to think. Found Caleb already there, as she somehow knew she would. He had become her constant in these uncertain weeks, a presence she sought without conscious thought. "Big day tomorrow," he said without turning. "Yes." Nervous. Terrified. Beth leaned against the porch railing beside him. "What if we lose? What if the jury believes his lawyers instead of us? Then we appeal. We fight longer. We do not give up." "How do you stay so certain?" Caleb looked at her. In the moonlight his eyes were shadowed but intense. "Because the alternative is unacceptable. Hargrove winning means good people continue to suffer. Means cowards like him get to keep terrorizing anyone who challenges them. I cannot live with that. Can you?" "No. But I am tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid." He reached out, took her hand. "I know. But you are the strongest person I have ever met. Stronger than Rachel even, and I thought she was unbreakable. You have survived things that would have destroyed most people. You can survive one more day." Beth leaned into him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. They had been careful about physical contact, aware of propriety, of Lucy watching, of the fragility of what was growing between them. But tonight, with everything hanging in the balance, propriety seemed less important than comfort. "Caleb, if things go badly tomorrow, if Hargrove somehow walks free and comes after us, he will not. But if he does, I want you to know that these months here have been the happiest of my life. That finding this place, these people, you, has meant everything." Caleb pulled back slightly, looked down at her. "Beth, nothing is going to happen to you. I will not let it. You cannot promise that. Watch me." He kissed her, then carefully giving her space to pull away. She did not. Instead, she kissed him back, pouring into it all the fear and hope and desperate affection she had been holding inside. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. "After tomorrow," Caleb said quietly, "when this is done, we need to talk, really talk, about what this is, what we want it to be." "Yes," Beth agreed. "After tomorrow." They stood together until the cold drove them inside, parting at their respective doors with lingering looks that promised future conversations, future kisses, a future that neither quite dared to believe in yet, but both wanted desperately. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding the doorway trying to hear. The trial of Victor Hargrove was the biggest event Granger had seen in years. Everyone wanted to witness it. Hargrove sat at the defense table, flanked by his lawyers, 3 well-dressed men from back east who radiated expensive confidence. He had aged in his weeks of confinement, his face gaunt, his expensive suit hanging looser than it should. But his eyes were as hard and calculating as ever. The prosecution was handled by Marshal Trent himself, with assistance from a territorial prosecutor. Their case was methodical and damning. They presented documents showing fraudulent loans, foreclosures initiated before defaults had actually occurred, money transferred from the bank to Hargrove's personal accounts. They called witnesses who testified to threats and intimidation. Samuel Green took the stand mid-morning. He spoke clearly, despite obvious nerves, describing what he had witnessed working at the bank, how Hargrove had ordered the arson of Diamond Creek's barn, how he had systematically stolen from depositors and borrowers alike, how he had used his position to accumulate wealth and power at others' expense. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They attacked Samuel's character, suggested he had embezzled money himself, and was deflecting blame, questioned his memory and his motives. But Samuel held firm. When asked directly if he was lying, he looked at the jury and said simply, "No, sir, I am telling the truth. My conscience would not let me stay silent anymore." Tom Brennan testified about losing his ranch. Others followed with similar stories. The pattern was undeniable. Hargrove had built his empire on other people's ruin. Beth was called in the afternoon. She walked to the stand, feeling every eye in the room on her, aware of her limp, of the whispers that followed her everywhere. The prosecutor was gentle, asking straightforward questions about her arrival in Granger, her employment at Diamond Creek, Hargrove's attempts to intimidate and frame her. Then the defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was a sharp-faced man named Aldrich, who smiled like a predator scenting blood. "Mrs. Sinclair, is it true that you were suspected of murdering your husband?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "I was suspected but never charged. My husband died in an accident." "An accident you survived, conveniently." There was nothing convenient about it. Beth kept her voice level with effort. "I was severely injured. My leg was permanently damaged." "Yet you inherited his estate." "There was no estate, only debts. His family took everything." "So you say. But perhaps you needed money badly enough to resort to theft. Perhaps that is why Mr. Hargrove's testimony about your attempt to steal from Diamond Creek should be given weight." "I never stole from Diamond Creek. Those charges were fabricated." "Or perhaps you are fabricating accusations against my client to deflect from your own crimes." Marshal Trent stood. "Objection. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning." "Sustained. Mr. Aldrich, ask questions or sit down." Aldrich smiled thinly. "Mrs. Sinclair, is it not true that you have a history of dishonesty, that you came to Wyoming under false pretenses, presenting yourself as respectable when you were actually fleeing scandal?" Beth felt her face flush, but she met his gaze steadily. "I came to Wyoming seeking a fresh start. That is not dishonesty. That is survival. And in the course of that survival, you invented a conspiracy theory about my client to justify your presence at Diamond Creek." "No. I discovered evidence of actual crimes and reported them. That is called doing the right thing." or it is called slander against a man whose only crime was refusing to enable your parasitic existence in this community." The words stung because they echoed Beth's deepest fears about herself, that she was a burden, a parasite, someone who took from others and gave nothing back. But then she remembered the work she had done, the value she had provided, Lucy's education and happiness, the accounts she had organized, the meals she had cooked, the evidence she had helped compile. She was not a parasite. She was a contributor, a member of the community who pulled her weight. "Mr. Aldrich," she said quietly, "I have worked hard every day since arriving at Diamond Creek. I have earned my place there through honest labor. Whatever you say about me, whatever aspersions you cast on my character, that remains true. I am not perfect. I have made mistakes. But I have never stolen, never lied under oath, never used my position to hurt others. Can your client say the same?" Aldrich's smile faltered. He tried several more questions, but Beth held firm, refusing to be rattled. Finally, he dismissed her with a contemptuous wave. Caleb was waiting when she stepped down. He did not touch her in the crowded courtroom, but his eyes said everything. "You did good," he murmured. "Real good." The trial lasted 3 days. The defense presented character witnesses who testified to Hargrove's generosity and civic contributions. They brought in banking experts who questioned the prosecution's interpretation of financial records. They suggested that any irregularities were the result of honest mistakes or overzealous employees acting without Hargrove's knowledge. But the sheer weight of evidence was overwhelming. Too many witnesses, too many documents, too clear a pattern of predatory behavior. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, closing arguments concluded. The jury retired to deliberate. Everyone filed out of the courtroom to wait. Beth found herself in the small park across from the courthouse, sitting on a bench under a cottonwood tree. Lucy had stayed at the ranch with Dorothy Green, too young to spend days in a courtroom. But Beth felt the girl's absence keenly, wanted her simple confidence that everything would turn out right. Whitmore joined her on the bench. "However this goes," he said, "I want you to know something. You have been good for Diamond Creek, good for Lucy, good for all of us, and you will always have a place there regardless of what happens to Hargrove." "Thank you, Thaddeus. That means more than I can say." They sat in comfortable silence, watching people mill about, everyone waiting for the verdict that would determine not just Hargrove's fate, but the future of the entire community. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When word came that they had reached a verdict, everyone crowded back into the courtroom. Beth found herself squeezed between Caleb and Samuel Green, their shoulders touching in the packed space. The foreman stood. He was a rancher from outside Granger, someone with no ties to Hargrove's influence. He read from the paper in his hand. "We, the jury, find the defendant Victor Hargrove guilty on all counts of fraud, extortion, and arson. We recommend the maximum sentence allowed by law." The courtroom exploded. Some people cheered, others gasped in shock. Hargrove's face went white, then red, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His lawyers immediately began shouting objections, demanding appeal, questioning the jury's competence. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Victor Hargrove, you are sentenced to 20 years imprisonment and ordered to make restitution to all verified victims. You will be transported to the territorial prison immediately. This court is adjourned." Hargrove's threat died with him in that moment. Whatever power he had held over this town, over her life, was broken. He was just a man in chains now, facing justice. At last he locked eyes with Beth across the courtroom. His expression promised that this was not over, that he would find a way to have his revenge. But Beth felt no fear, only relief so profound it made her lightheaded. Outside in the golden late afternoon sun, people gathered in clusters, some celebrating, some processing, some already worrying about what Hargrove's conviction meant for outstanding loans and business dealings. Beth stood slightly apart, watching, trying to absorb that it was actually over. Caleb found her, took her hand boldly in front of everyone. "Told you he would not win." "You were right." "Want to go home?" Home, Diamond Creek. When had she started thinking of it that way? But she realized she had weeks ago. The ranch was home now, more than Boston had ever been, more than anywhere else had ever been. "Yes," she said, "let us go home." They rode back as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Lucy ran out to meet them, having clearly been watching from the window. She launched herself at Beth with such force they both nearly fell. "You won," Papa sent word with one of the hands. "You won." "We won," Beth corrected. "All of us together." That night, after Lucy had finally been convinced to go to bed after Dorothy and Samuel and Tom Brennan and all the others had retired after Whitmore had said good night and closed his door, Beth and Caleb found themselves alone on the porch. They stood in their usual spots but closer now, touching. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They fit together, Beth thought. Despite coming from such different worlds, despite all the reasons they should not work, they fit. "You said we needed to talk," Beth reminded him quietly. "About what this is, what we want it to be." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "I loved Rachel. Part of me will always love her. And Samuel. I will carry them with me until I die." Beth tensed slightly, preparing for rejection. But Caleb continued, "But they are gone. And I am still here, still alive. And somewhere in the past months I stopped just existing and started living again. Because of you." He turned to face her fully, both hands on her shoulders. "I love you, Beth. Not as a replacement for Rachel, not as some consolation prize. I love you for who you are, for your strength and your courage and your stubborn refusal to quit, for the way you love Lucy, for how hard you work, for your sharp mind and sharper tongue. I love all of it, all of you." Beth felt tears streaming down her face. "Caleb, I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep my distance, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. You make me want to stay, to build something lasting, to take the risk of hoping for a future. Then marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Beth stared at him, shocked into silence. "I know it is fast," Caleb brushed on. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but out here life is hard and short. You do not waste time when you find something worth keeping. And Beth, you are worth keeping. So marry me. Be my wife. Help me raise Lucy. Build a life with me." Beth thought about all the reasons to say no. They barely knew each other. She had been married before, and it had ended in tragedy. People would talk, would say she was desperate, that he was settling. All the logical, practical reasons to wait, to be cautious, to protect herself from more potential heartbreak. Then she thought about Lucy's face when she saw Beth each morning, about the satisfaction of work well done, about the way Caleb looked at her like she was precious rather than damaged, about having a place where she belonged, people who wanted her there. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Caleb Hart, I will marry you." He kissed her then deeply, without the hesitation of before. This was a claiming, a promise, a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We should probably tell Lucy," Beth said, laughing a little through her tears. "Tomorrow. Tonight is just ours." They stood together under the Wyoming stars, holding each other, already planning a future that a few months ago neither had believed possible. Inside the house, Lucy slept peacefully, unaware that her family was about to grow, unaware that the woman she had claimed as a mother was about to become one officially. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in early autumn, when the heat had broken and the cottonwoods turned gold. It was held at the ranch outdoors, with the valley stretched out below and mountains rising behind. Simple, but beautiful. Beth wore a dress that Dorothy Green had helped her alter from the one good gown she had brought from Boston. Lucy served as flower girl, taking her duties with the utmost seriousness. Whitmore gave Beth away, having become as much a father figure to her as he was an employer. The ceremony was performed by Reverend Collins, who had developed a grudging respect for Beth after the trial. His wife, Regina Hargrove, now a widow in all but law, had publicly apologized to Beth the week after Victor's conviction. "I was wrong about you," she had said stiffly but sincerely. I let my husband's prejudices become my own. You have shown more character than most people born to this town." The guests were an eclectic mix, ranch hands in their Sunday best, neighboring ranchers who had benefited from Hargrove's conviction, Samuel Green and his mother, Tom Brennan's family, even Clara Jenkins from the general store who had become an unlikely friend. Everyone who had stood with Diamond Creek through the danger now gathered to celebrate its triumph. Caleb wore a new suit, his hair trimmed, his boots polished. But what Beth noticed most was his expression as she walked toward him. Wonder, joy, love so clear it took her breath away. The vows were traditional, but felt revolutionary. When Caleb promised to honor and cherish her, Beth believed him. When she promised to stand by him through whatever came, she meant it with every fiber of her being. They were married, husband and wife, partners in truth. The celebration lasted into the evening. There was food and music and dancing. Lucy insisted on dancing with both her new parents, stepping on their feet with equal enthusiasm. Old Jack played fiddle, his back apparently healed by the joy of the occasion. People laughed and ate and forgot for a few hours about hardship and danger. As the stars came out and guests began departing, Beth found herself standing at the edge of the party, watching. Caleb came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Tired?" he asked. "No, just happy. So happy it almost scares me." "Nothing to be scared of. We earned this." Beth leaned back against him. "Did we, though? It feels like so much was just luck. Me arriving in Granger when I did. You deciding to offer me work. Everything that followed. Maybe. But luck only matters if you are brave enough to take advantage of it. You are. That is what made the difference." They stood like that until the last guests departed, until Lucy was carried to bed by Dorothy, until Whitmore said good night with a knowing smile. Then they went to their room, no longer separate spaces, but shared. A marriage bed in a house that had become home. What happened that night was private tinder, a claiming that had been building for months. Beth had been afraid, remembering Thomas's rough handling, his impatient disregard for her pleasure. But Caleb was different, patient, attentive. He made love, like he did everything else, with focus and determination and an absolute refusal to quit until the job was done right. Afterward, lying in his arms, Beth felt a completeness she had not known was possible. This was what partnership meant, what marriage should be. Two people choosing each other, supporting each other, building something together that neither could build alone. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Caleb replied. "Always will." Time moved differently after the wedding. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. The rhythm of ranch life provided structure. There was always work to be done, animals to tend, weather to worry about. But underneath the work was a foundation of contentment that made even the hard days bearable. Beth continued teaching Lucy, who proved to be a brilliant student with an insatiable curiosity about the world. She expanded the lessons to include other ranch children, turning a corner of the main house into an informal schoolroom. Parents were grateful for the education their children received. The community began to see Beth not as an outsider, but as a valuable contributor. She also took over full management of the ranch accounts, revealing a talent for finance that impressed even Whitmore. Under her guidance, Diamond Creek prospered. They expanded their cattle operation, invested in better breeding stock, negotiated favorable contracts with buyers. The ranch that had been successful became exceptional. Caleb thrived with the weight of grief finally lifting. He laughed more, smiled easier, still carried Rachel and Samuel in his heart, but no longer as open wounds, more as honored memories. Beth understood this, never feeling threatened by his past because she was so clearly his future. The first winter of their marriage was hard, with storms that buried the valley under snow for weeks. But the house was warm, the pantry full, the family safe. They spent long evenings by the fire, Beth reading aloud while Caleb whittled and Lucy played with her dolls. Simple domesticity that was more precious than any grand adventure. Spring brought a discovery that changed everything. Beth was pregnant. She told Caleb in the barn one morning away from the house where Lucy might overhear. His face transformed, cycling through shock to wonder to fierce joy in the space of heartbeats. A baby. We are having a baby. Yes, due in early autumn, the doctor thinks. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his strength. I thought I would never have this again. A child, a family. After Samuel died, I thought that part of my life was over. Are you happy? Happy does not begin to cover it. Lucy was equally ecstatic when they told her. A baby brother or sister. Can I help take care of it? Can I teach it things? Can I pick the name? Beth laughed. You can help with everything. You are going to be the best big sister. The pregnancy was easier than Beth expected. Her leg ached more as her body changed, but otherwise she felt strong, healthy, almost glowing with the life growing inside her. Caleb was alternately protective and adorable, hovering, but trying not to hover, clearly terrified something would go wrong, but not wanting to show it. Dorothy Green became an invaluable source of wisdom, having raised 5 children herself. She guided Beth through the changes, the preparations, the emotional roller coaster of bringing new life into the world. The baby came on a warm September evening as the sun painted the mountains gold. Beth labored through the night with Dorothy and a midwife from town attending. Caleb paced outside the room wearing a path in the floorboards until finally, as dawn broke, a baby's cry split the air. Dorothy emerged beaming. You have a daughter, Mr. Hart. Mother and baby both doing fine. Caleb burst into the room, barely hearing the midwife's cautions about giving Beth space. He knelt by the bed where Beth lay exhausted, but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. A girl, Beth said softly. We have a daughter. Caleb looked at the baby, at her tiny, perfect face, her dark wisps of hair, her miniature fingers curled into fists. Tears streamed down his face unashamedly. She is beautiful, just like her mother. I want to name her Rachel, after your first wife, if that is all right with you. Caleb's breath caught. Beth, you do not have to do that. I want to. Rachel was important to you. She shaped who you are, and who you are is the man I love. Our daughter can honor her memory. Rachel Hart. Caleb tested the name. Yeah, that is perfect. Lucy was allowed in next, climbing carefully onto the bed to peer at her new sister. She is so small. Was I ever that small? Even smaller, Beth assured her. I am going to teach her everything, reading and writing and how to be brave. I know you will. The months that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Rachel was a demanding baby, requiring attention at all hours. But watching Caleb with his daughter, seeing his gentleness and patience, Beth fell in love with him all over again. Lucy took her big sister duties seriously, always wanting to help feed or hold or entertain Rachel. The house filled with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Diamond Creek continued to prosper. The ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the territory. Whitmore talked about expanding further, buying adjacent land, building an empire that would last generations. 2 years after Rachel's birth, Beth discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder, her body older and more tired. But in the spring of her 31st year, she delivered a healthy boy. They named him Samuel, completing the circle, honoring all that had been lost while celebrating all that had been found. Time continued its inexorable march, years that felt both quick and slow each day, much like the one before, but somehow adding up to a life of substance and meaning. The years passed quickly. By 1894, Lucy had grown into a remarkable young woman of 17, educated beyond what most frontier girls could expect, confident and capable. She announced her intention to become a doctor, shocking some but surprising no one who knew her. Beth and Caleb supported her, fully, finding the money to send her east to a women's medical college. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of excitement about her studies and determination to return west to practice. Rachel inherited her father's quiet strength and her mother's sharp intellect. She was 4 when she declared she wanted to learn ranching, not just housewifery. Caleb taught her to ride and rope and read the land. By 7, she could do a day's work that would shame many grown men. Samuel was gentler, more contemplative. He loved books and learning, spending hours in Beth's makeshift schoolroom. But he also had his father's sense of right and wrong, a moral clarity that made him stand up for what he believed even when it was difficult. Whitmore eventually remarried, finding love with a widow from the next valley. She brought her own children, blending families, until Diamond Creek felt less like a ranch and more like a small village. The main house expanded, adding rooms and wings to accommodate everyone. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb took Beth back to the spot where they had first talked the fence line overlooking the valley. They stood in the same positions, older now, weathered by time and work, but stronger for it. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked. Saying yes, taking the risk. Beth looked at the valley, at the ranch buildings below, at the land they had worked and defended and loved. "Not for 1 second. This has been the best life I could have imagined. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are." Caleb pulled her close. "I am grateful every day that you stepped off that train into my life. I am grateful you were brave enough to stop me from getting on one." They kissed, comfortable and familiar, but still holding that spark of connection that had drawn them together in the first place. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair in Boston, through the rejection and humiliation of her arrival in Granger, to this moment of complete contentment. She had learned that worth was not given, but earned through daily effort and integrity. That family was not just blood, but chosen connection. That love could bloom in the hardest soil if tended with patience and care. The ranch came into view, smoke rising from chimneys, lights glowing in windows. Rachel playing in the yard with a barn cat. Samuel reading on the porch steps. The sounds and sights of home. Caleb squeezed her hand. Ready. Always. They walked together into the house, into their life, into the future they had built from courage and hope and stubborn determination. Behind them, the sun set over the valley, painting everything gold. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. But tonight they were home. They were together. They were exactly where they were meant to be. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass. Lucy returned from medical school and set up practice in Granger, becoming the first female doctor many people in the territory had ever seen. She faced skepticism and prejudice, but persevered, eventually earning respect through competence and dedication. She married another doctor, a kind man who supported her ambitions, and they built a practice that served the entire valley. Rachel took over more of the ranch operations as Caleb aged, proving to have her father's instincts and her mother's business sense. She married a neighboring rancher's son, and their combined properties made them one of the largest operations in Wyoming. But she never forgot her roots at Diamond Creek, visiting frequently with her own children. Samuel became a lawyer specializing in land rights and water law. He used his legal expertise to help small ranchers fight against larger corporate interests, carrying on his parents' legacy of standing up for the powerless against the powerful. Beth and Caleb aged together, their hair graying their bodies, slowing, but their partnership as strong as ever. They sat together on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over land they had defended and nurtured, surrounded by the family and community they had built. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at Diamond Creek. Children and grandchildren, old friends and new. The celebration was loud and joyous, full of stories and laughter. Late in the evening, when most people had gone home or to bed, Beth and Caleb found themselves alone on the porch. Their spot, where so many important moments had happened. 30 years, Beth marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Caleb's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. Sometimes I still see you as that woman on the bench outside the hotel, so proud, so alone, so determined not to break. And I still see you as the man who offered me hope when I had none left, who saw me as a person, not a problem. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Beth corrected. The best was asking me to marry you. Caleb laughed. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first conversations, their first kiss, their years of building a life together. Caleb. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For stopping me from leaving, for giving me a chance, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable, for building this life with me. Caleb turned to her, took both her hands in his. His face was lined now, weathered by decades of sun and wind. But his eyes were the same gray she had fallen in love with, still clear, still steady, still looking at her like she was precious. Beth Sinclair Hart, you are the greatest gift I ever received. Every day with you has been a blessing. Every challenge we have faced together has made me stronger. I loved you from the moment you stood up to Regina Hargrove with nothing but your dignity as armor, and I will love you until my last breath. Beth felt tears on her face. Happy tears, grateful tears. I love you too. Always. They kissed gentle and sweet, a benediction on 3 decades of partnership. Inside the house, their grandchildren laughed. Their children talked about ranch business and medical practices and legal cases. The community they had built thrived. And on the porch, 2 people who had found each other against all odds sat together, still in love, still grateful, still building their life one day at a time. The story could end here with this perfect moment. But life is not made of moments frozen in time. It continues flowing like water, always moving forward. Caleb passed away in his sleep 7 years later at the age of 74. He died in the bed he had shared with Beth for 37 years, her hand in his, their children and grandchildren having said their goodbyes. He slipped away peacefully, a man who had lived fully and loved deeply and left the world better than he found it. Beth grieved, but not with the desperate sorrow of her youth. This was the grief of completion rather than truncation. They had been given decades together. They had built something lasting. Caleb's death was sad, but not tragic. It was the natural end to a life well lived. She remained at Diamond Creek surrounded by family still sharp-minded and active despite her 82 years and the leg that had never healed properly. She wrote letters to friends across the territory. She advised Rachel on ranch management. She watched her great-grandchildren play in the same yard where her own children had grown up. On quiet evenings, she sat on the porch in her usual spot. The space where Caleb had stood seemed empty, but not painfully so. More like a comfortable absence, a chair waiting for its occupant to return. One afternoon in late spring, as Beth sat reading on that familiar porch Lucy visited with her grandchildren, they found Beth staring out at the valley, a slight smile on her face. "Mother," Lucy asked. She had called Beth that since the wedding, never once using stepmother. "Are you all right?" "I am fine, darling, just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The day your father offered me a job, standing right there." Beth pointed toward where the wagon had stopped decades ago. "I was so lost, so alone, so certain there was no place in the world for someone like me. And then he gave me a chance. He always said you were the bravest person he knew." "Did he?" Beth smiled. "I think we were both brave. It takes courage to ask for help and courage to offer it. We were lucky enough to find each other at exactly the right moment." Lucy sat beside her mother, took her hand. "I am glad you said yes. Glad you stayed. Otherwise I would not have had you as my mother, and I cannot imagine my life without that." Beth squeezed Lucy's hand. "Neither can I, sweet girl. Neither can I." As the sun set that evening, painting the valley in familiar gold and purple, Beth closed her eyes and let herself remember. The good and the bad, the fear and the triumph, the love that had saved her and given her a reason to keep fighting. She had come to Wyoming with nothing, and she had found everything. That was the real story, not about a widow who got lucky or a cowboy who played hero, but about two broken people who found each other and through daily acts of courage and kindness made themselves whole. Beth lived another 3 years, dying peacefully at 85, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She was buried next to Caleb on the hill overlooking Diamond Creek, their graves marked by simple stones that gave only names and dates. But their real legacy was not in stone. It was in the ranch that still thrived, now run by Rachel's grandchildren. It was in the medical practice Lucy had started, now serving its third generation of patients. It was in the legal precedents Samuel had set protecting water rights for small ranchers. It was in the stories told and retold of courage and love and choosing to stand up rather than bow down. Years later, a young woman arrived in Wyoming running from her own troubles back east. She stood in a town square alone and frightened, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. An older rancher noticed her, saw something in her face that reminded him of stories his grandmother used to tell, about a woman who arrived with nothing and built everything. "Ma'am," he said, approaching carefully, "you look like you could use some help." The young woman looked at him warily. "I do not need charity." "Not offering charity, offering work. My ranch needs help and you look capable." She stared at him, surprised. "You do not know me. Why would you offer me work?" The rancher smiled. "My grandmother used to say that worth is earned through what you do not determine by where you come from. You interested in proving your worth?" The young woman thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, I am." And so the cycle continued. Courage begetting courage, kindness inspiring kindness, the legacy of Beth and Caleb Hart rippling forward through time, touching lives they would never know, making the harsh frontier just a little bit gentler for those who came after. That is how we change the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those have their place, but through daily choices to be kind when we could be cruel, to help when we could ignore, to stand up when we could sit down. Beth Sinclair came to Granger expecting rejection and found acceptance, expecting to survive and found a reason to thrive, expecting nothing and received everything. That is the power of second chances, the magic of human connection, the promise that no matter how far we fall, there is always a possibility of rising again, if we are brave enough to try, if we are strong enough to keep going, if we are wise enough to accept help when it is offered, and lucky enough to find someone who sees our worth when we can no longer see it ourselves.